while the Siege of Gondor and Battle of the Pelennor Fields marked the primary thrust of Sauron's strategy given his fear of the heir of Isildur, the northern theatre of the war was just as pivotal in deciding the fate of Middle-earth. So today we're going to take a look at the war in the north to see how Dale, Erebor and the Elven realms defended themselves. Simultaneously, we will talk about the aftermath of the Battle of the Pelennor Fields and the last major engagement of the war, the Battle of the Black Gate. Sauron's attack on the Northern Realms was foreseen by Gandalf many years earlier, leading the then Grey Wizard to aid Thorin in his quest to reclaim the Lonely Mountain. Gandalf had seen through the guise of the Necromancer of Dol Guldur much earlier and predicted that Sauron would make use of the sheer destruction Smaug could unleash in order to destroy Gondor. The dragon's death at the hand of Bard severely dented the Dark Lord's plans, giving the free peoples of Middle-earth a fighting chance in the war to come, while the newly re-established Kingdom of Dale and Kingdom Under the Mountain provided a vital northern bulwark against the forces of Sauron. In TA 3018, Gloin revealed to the Council of Elrond that messengers had arrived at the gates of the Lonely Mountain, sent on behalf of Sauron, seeking information on the Shire and the Hobbits, while also asking for them to turn over Bilbo's ring. Further, they asked for the submission of the kingdoms to Mordor's overlordship, and when these entreaties were refused, dire consequences had been threatened. Messengers likewise approached King Brand of Dale, and when similar requests were refused, Easterlings loyal to the Dark Lord began to gather on the outskirts of Dale. Likewise, in the realm of Thranduil and that of Lothlorien, the numbers of foul creatures encroaching ever further from Dol Guldur into Mirkwood alerted the elves to the fact that they would not be left unscathed in the coming conflict. Thranduil, Celeborn and Galadriel made what preparations they could. However, many of the finest warriors of the elves had at this stage committed to sailing west to Valinor, leaving the respective elvish forces weakened. This northern theatre of the War of the Ring, therefore, pitted the last of the declining races of elves and dwarfs against the ascendant forces of the Dark Lord, with the outcome of pitched battles remaining exceptionally uncertain. War would come first to Dale, however, as on the 17th of March TA 3019, the massive Easterling host crossed the borders of the kingdom, intending to invade and capture the city. The Easterlings were mainly composed of well-equipped and well-drilled warriors from Rhûn, surprising the forces of Dale and the Lonely Mountain with the speed at which they crossed the Redwater River, given their numbers. Kings Brand and Dane II quickly assembled their forces, and it could be estimated that there were 2,500 dwarves of Erebor and of the Iron Hills, alongside 3,500 men of Dale, compared to that of the 20,000 strong force of Easterlings. This assault coincided with the siege of Minas Tirith in order to prevent any aid coming to Gondor from the north, tying down these forces in a manner Saruman was unable to achieve with the Riders of Rohan. The two kings met the Easterlings in open battle on the same day the Easterlings crossed the river, hoping to prevent the destruction of Dale, putting their faith in the fact that the foundries of Erebor gave them a massive advantage in terms of their arms and armour. 3 days of heavy fighting ensued, wherein the steadfastness of the dwarves and men of Dale was eventually eroded by the numerical advantage possessed by the men of Rhûn, forcing them to retreat. Seeing that Lake Town would be indefensible, the combined force of men and dwarves attempted to retreat behind the impregnable gates of the Lonely Mountain, with Kings Brand and Dane leading a desperate rearguard action. The two kings managed to buy enough time for their forces to fall back into the mountains. However, Brand was struck down by an Easterling's blade before the gate of the Lonely Mountain. Dane, enraged by the death of his close friend and ally, stood over Brand's corpse and refused to give an inch despite the intense pressure exerted by the far more numerous Easterling force. After a prolonged defense of the King of Dale's body, the Dwarven King Under the Mountain was also slain, despite the piles of Easterling casualties that mounted around the stalwart king. The forces of the deceased leaders then locked the gates of the mountain and prepared for a prolonged siege. While the men of Dale and dwarves of Erebor and the Iron Hills remained besieged behind the gates of the Lonely Mountain, Their primary hope for victory lay with the men of the West, led by the soon-to-be King of Gondor, Aragorn. Even earlier, Lothlorien had been invaded by a host of orcs coming out of Dol Guldur, first on the 11th of March TA 3019, then again on the 15th, and a final assault was then made upon the Elvish lands on the 22nd of March. Meanwhile, on the 15th of March TA 3019, Thranduil's realm was invaded by a large horde of orcs, beginning what would become known as the Battle Under the Trees. This was done to secure the flank of the assaults on Lothlorien, and prevent the great rulers of the elves converging and forming a unified front against the orcs of Dol Guldur. The Easterlings of Rhûn were to reinforce the assault. However, they had been slowed immeasurably by the stubbornness of the defenders of Erebor. The Galadrim, led by Celeborn and Galadriel, repulsed each assault, relying heavily upon the courage and potency of the renowned elvish swordsmen, alongside the power of Galadriel's ring, to counteract the vast numerical advantage of Dol Guldur. While Thranduil also proved his competency in personally leading the elven counterattack, the Elven King, whose forces were more renowned for their deadly archers, emerged victorious after a battle which caused a great ruin of fire throughout the woods. This victory caused Thranduil to declare a new year of the elves shortly after their victory. At this point, Frodo and Sam, alongside their guide Gollum, had made their way to the passes of Cirith Ungol, where the treachery of Gollum was revealed, turning the hobbits against one another, before leading Frodo into the clutches of Shelob, a great spider of immense proportions, and one of the last true descendants of the original Dark Lord Morgoth's ally, Ungoliant. Shelob pricked Frodo with her stinger, causing him to become immobilized and easy prey for the great spider. Sam, however, wielding Sting and the Light of Arendil, fought off the foul beast, saving Frodo's life once more. However, believing his dear friend to be dead, he took the ring and, despite his despair, intended to finish their quest regardless. At this point, a group of orcs and uruks from the garrison of Cirith Ungol came upon Frodo's body and remarked that he was still alive, before bringing him to the tower for questioning. Sam then took it upon himself to save the ring-bearer's life once more, and taking advantage of the fact that the garrison had engaged in a mild civil war between the orcs and uruks for the ownership of Frodo's mithril shirt, was able to reach Frodo before he could come to harm. Here he returned the ring, counting himself among only the company of Bilbo, having handed over the one ring, while also being the only individual to have ever done so willingly. From here, the two hobbits, disguising themselves as best they could, began the perilous journey across the plains of Gorgoroth, which was inhabited by thousands of orcs, in order to complete their quest and cast the ring into the fires of Mount Doom. Meanwhile, following the successful defense of Minas Tirith, Aragorn gathered to him all of the wise men of Gondor, as well as his companions and the most prominent men of Rohan, in order to discuss their final moves in the dying embers of the War of the Ring. This came to be known as the Last Debate, and was conducted outside of the walls of the city, as Aragorn refused to enter until the war had been won and he could be properly proclaimed king. Many men who were well acquainted with tactics and warfare, such as Imrahil and Éomer, put forward their opinions as to the best course of action. Yet it was the counsel of Gandalf which swayed Aragorn, with the wizard remarking, "We have not the ring. Without it we cannot by force defeat his force. But we must at all costs keep his eye from his true peril. We cannot achieve victory by arms, but by arms we can give the ring-bearer his only chance, frail though it be. We must push Sauron to his last throw. We must call out his hidden strength, so that he shall empty his land. We must march out to meet him at once. We must make ourselves the bait, though his jaws should close on us. We must walk open-eyed into that trap, with courage, but small hope for ourselves." Knowing that Frodo and Sam were now within the depths of Mordor, they were left with no other choice but to march out and meet the Dark Lord. By sacrificing their lives, they could buy the ring-bearer enough time to complete his quest and save Middle-earth for good and all. Each and every one of those gathered at this last debate knew that it was likely death awaited them, yet it was the only course of action now left to them. a garrison of a size greater than had originally guarded the city was left, and the captain of the West took with him 7,000 soldiers of Gondor and Rohan, alongside his Grey Company. The impossibility of victory was not lost on the men of the West, however, with Imrahil laughing aloud before stating, "Surely this is the greatest jest in all the history of Gondor, that we should ride with 7,000, scarce as many as the vanguard of its army in the days of its power, to assail the mountains and the impenetrable gate of the Black Land. So might a child threaten a mail-clad knight with a bow of string and green willow." The host of the Men of the West left Minas Tirith on March 18th and bypassed Minas Morgul, heading straight for the Black Gate. Sauron, falsely believing that Aragorn now possessed the ring and would use its power against him, fell for this ploy and began to send all of his warriors to the Black Gate. Aragorn then left a force of just under 1,000 men at the crossroads in order to guard the road to Minas Tirith should the battle go poorly. Midway through Ithilien, they were then assaulted by Haradrim and Easterlings. The soldiers were quickly detected by the rangers of Ithilien, however, and driven off with little casualties. As the Men of the West approached Dagorlad, a number of the farmers of Lossarnach and some of the fainter of heart among the Rohirrim balked at the prospect of assaulting the Black Gate. Aragorn, displaying his compassion, allowed them to leave, instead sending them to liberate Caer Andros, weakening the army even further, so that they maintained a strength of barely 6,000 men. Yet as the host of the West continued ever onwards, they soon came to see the extraordinary vastness of the Black Gate, and even the most valiant among them began to feel the cold tendrils of fear creep through their veins. Heralds were sent upon Prince Imrahil's suggestion to announce the coming of King Elessar. In response, the Black Gate opened a fraction, allowing for a delegation of the Dark Lord to emerge. At their head was a dark Númenórean of the ancient faction of King's Men who had survived the fall of the kingdom and fallen into the service of Sauron. He was known as the Mouth of Sauron and demanded the surrender of the host, producing Frodo's mithril vest and cloak to the despair of the hobbits among Aragorn's retinue. Gandalf then asked for the terms of surrender, which were to be Sauron's recognized dominion over Isengard and Rohan, as well as the vassalage of Gondor, to which the Men of the West refused in the plainest of terms. Enraged by their unwillingness to surrender, the Mouth of Sauron withdrew behind the Black Gate, which now opened, allowing a force of between 60 and 100,000 orcs, trolls and Uruk-hai to emerge. On top of that, thousands of orcs surfaced from the hillsides surrounding the plain of Morannon, with another force of Easterlings appearing from the former Gondorian garrison tower of Carchost, ensuring that the Men of the West now knew the true strength of Mordor. These denizens of the dark proceeded to surround the host of the West, ensuring that retreat was no longer an option. In the early stages of the battle, the Dark Lord's warriors found it difficult to reach the Men of the West due to the large slag pools and pits of waste that surrounded the Black Gate. This bought Aragorn enough time to organize his soldiers. He placed two forces of 3,000 each upon the two slag piles in the center of the plain of Morannon, which were made up of piles of rubble and waste. The contingent upon the right hill was commanded by Imrahil and Éomer in the front line, while consisting of the Knights of Dol Amroth and elements of the Tower Guard, among the regulars of both Rohan and Gondor. While the hill to the left was led by Aragorn alongside Gandalf, the remaining members of the Fellowship, Elladen and Elrohir, sons of Elrond, and the Grey Company, with Arwen's banner flying on its front line. The Dark Lord, with his eye fixed firmly upon the battle, urged his subjects forward. His forces crashed into the host of the West like a tide breaking upon the cliffside. The Men of the West held, utilizing their superior discipline and martial prowess, as well as the height advantage afforded by the slag piles, to hold back the orcs, trolls, and evil men. While this valiant defense caused far greater casualties on the part of the Dark Lord, it was not sustainable, and the Men of the West were hard pushed to keep up this immense effort. The remaining Nazgûl then emerged, threatening to dismantle the disciplined lines of the host of the West, before the Great Eagles entered the battle, led by their Windlord Gwaihir. The Eagles and Nazgûl fought for aerial superiority, with Pippin echoing the sentiment of Bilbo during the Battle of the Five Armies by repeating aloud, "The eagles are coming." As the initial attack of the forces of Sauron failed, armoured trolls, wielding crude maces and cudgels, were sent forth. Their attack managed to effectively break down the lines of the Men of the West, allowing orcs to swarm through, making Aragorn's position borderline untenable on both slag piles. The orcs further took example of the Easterlings and engaged in flanking maneuvers, attempting to make the most of their encirclement. It was only by the valour and steadfastness of Aragorn's soldiers that the defence of the slag piles could be maintained, despite overwhelming pressure from all sides. Meanwhile, Sam and Frodo, having disguised themselves as orcs, had at this point reached Mount Doom and looked poised to bring the battle to a premature end. Coming to the slopes of the Crack of Doom, Frodo's strength gave out, however, and he fell, only for Sam to carry him on his back across the last few steps. At this point, Gollum attacked the two hobbits, with Sam managing to fight him off as Frodo stumbled towards the depths of Mount Doom. Sam, having delayed Gollum long enough, made his way to the Crack of Doom, where, to his horror, Frodo had renounced the quest and claimed the ring as his own, placing it upon his finger. Sauron, now realizing that the ring was within the depths of Mount Doom, pulled his gaze from the plains of Morannon towards the Crack of Doom, calling the Nazgul to him. This earned the hard-pressed Men of the West a reprieve, as without the will of the Dark Lord driving them onwards, his forces began to falter, allowing the warriors on either slag pile breathing space with which they could reform their lines. A shocked and despairing Sam was caught unaware when Gollum attacked him from behind, knocking him unconscious with a rock, before attacking Frodo. The struggle was brief, as Frodo had been weakened by possessing and resisting the will of the ring for as long as he had, ending with Gollum biting off his finger and taking the one ring from him. Gollum celebrated, reclaiming his precious by dancing maniacally. However, he slipped upon the blood pulsing from Frodo's finger, causing him to fall into the Crack of Doom unwittingly, destroying the one ring. This caused the destruction of Barad-dûr, the Black Gate, and the Towers of the Teeth, while Mount Doom erupted violently, with the two hobbits barely escaping to the mountainside, where they were now surrounded by lava and ash, seemingly doomed, before being rescued by Gandalf, Gwaihir, and his great eagles. With the destruction of the ring, Sauron's being and his power were forever lost, and the threat of his dominion ended forever. On the plains of Morannon, the orcs panicked and began to flee, being cut down in droves by the resurgent Men of the West, while some of the Easterlings and Haradrim, bearing an undying hatred towards their western counterparts, fought to the last man, being utterly destroyed on that day. Others surrendered and were pardoned by King Elessar. Orc strongholds remained within the plains of Gorgoroth, however, necessitating Aragorn to lead his forces, which were still capable of fighting, immediately into the depths of Mordor to ensure the purging of the area was complete. Aragorn then freed the slaves of Nurn, granting them this extremely fertile area in the far south of the realm of Mordor to be ruled as they wished, following their years of enslavement under the cruel reign of Sauron. News of the demise of the Dark Lord spread quickly, with the Easterlings besieging the Lonely Mountain soon hearing of their overlord's destruction, which sapped them of any degree of morale. The armies of Dale and Erebor, now led by their new kings Bard II and Thorin III Stonehelm, led a sortie consisting of all the forces remaining to them still capable of fighting, and on the 27th of March drove the Easterlings from their lands, ending the siege of the Lonely Mountain. While this was ultimately a victory for Dale and Erebor, the casualties were high, lowering what were already scarce numbers of dwarfs, assuring the ascendancy of man. The elves, using their victory at the battle under the trees, and the fact that the Nazgul were gone with the defeat of their master, attacked Dol Guldur, led by Celeborn, Galadriel and Thranduil. We don't know much about the ensuing battle, but what we know for sure is that in one of the last true examples of the magic in this world, Galadriel came to the gates and cast down the walls, foul pits and crevices. Dol Guldur was finally destroyed and the forest was cleansed. This brings us to the end of the War of the Ring. However, the conclusion of this story is one for our next documentary on the history of Middle-earth. We're also planning to cover the battles of many other fantasy, sci-fi and space opera universes, so make sure you have subscribed and pressed the bell button. Please consider liking and sharing, as it helps immensely, and don't forget to comment. We'll try to read and respond to every comment, as we want to know what you think about this video and which videos you hope to see in the future. This is the Wizards and Warriors channel, and we'll catch you on the next one.